Hey, so I wanted to come on here again because I was watching a video earlier today regarding the experiences of women of color in Spain. And this is something that I'm familiar with. I find that I've vocalized in the past how I personally wouldn't travel to Europe, um, or Europe wouldn't be on the top of my list in terms of travel locations or destinations. First and foremost, given the fact that I live in the USA, I see enough um, white, or in other words, let's keep it real, those of European ancestry. How many more? And as a person of color that has been made to feel like the other, or has been othered, why would I go into a society or place, right, where there is the same demographic or population, a population that unfortunately I don't find that I've had good encounters or positive encounters with. That being, one, or at the very top of, like, I love learning about people that are also not heavily represented in the media, or countries that are not only not portrayed as positive by Western media, but also places that many people have not even heard of, or they haven't really been spoken about. They're the hidden gems of this world. So I have those personal feelings and sentiments as to why I wouldn't go to a European westernized, or a country, or countries that are made of white individuals. Not only is it racism, but the simple fact that, hey, I want to learn more and understand more of the way of life of other communities that have been portrayed negatively very often by Western media. What is the reality of those places? What is their story? Because the West likes to tell their story. White people, and I say this a lot, white people like to share the history and stories of communities of color. And I have no idea why and how they have this inner audacity to do that when it's not their story, it's not their experience. But once again, entitlement rules or reigns in those communities. And I wasn't surprised to hear the unfortunate stories of these women of color in this particular video. And it actually brought to mind one of my colleagues that is an Afro-Latina that I worked with in a past job most recently. And she would it was so saddening. Once again, this ties back too closely with what I was saying yesterday. A lot of POCs deny their own ancestry, deny their own heritage, deny their own identity. She would say things like she wants to go to the motherland. And me thinking, oh, the motherland, yes, the motherland being Africa, right? No, she meant the motherland being Spain. And it's so sad to see, and so sad to hear that, because I knew actually someone that she was from the Caribbean, but she was white adjacent, and she was from a Latin American country, and she had a Spaniard friend that would mock the very country, or the people from that very country that my friend was claiming Spain to be to be her motherland. So it's crazy because I mean, it's not surprising. But I also had to take a moment the other day to realize, oh my gosh, not only do I speak English, which is not, the native language, and naturally there was different tribal languages, I can only assume, here in the Americas, being not only the USA, but North America, South America. Like, Spanish and English are both not even they're not relevant to much of my ancestry, right? Be that my native and Black ancestry. And here we are, like, speaking these languages, and we don't take a moment to even acknowledge that, like, oh my gosh, not only is English essentially the language the colonizers have pushed, right, have made us to speak, made indigenous communities, native communities to speak, but also the Latin American community speaks a language that had nothing to do with their ancestry as well, unless naturally they're from Spain or they have ancestry from Spain, which, because of the intermarrying, and also a lot of, I can't even imagine their possible rape. There's a lot of things that have occurred historically, and people only think, oh, it's, intermingling, intermarriages. No, there were many horrific things that occurred historically that also led to many of us having Spaniard ancestry. So it's not only that they elected or selected personally, right? They made that choice, that conscious choice. It was like perhaps forced many times. So yeah, it's it also leads me to think for a moment, and I've noticed, within the West, there's this whole free Palestine push for like freedom and freedom for the oppressed on a global scale. It's led me to also say, okay, well, where is this energy? Where is this engagement for communities that are oppressed within these very countries? I hear, not only here in the USA, this free Palestine, right? And not only in Spain and other countries that have discriminated marginalized communities, including very individuals that they are claiming freedom for, saying freedom for. Where's that kindness, that empathy, that good treatment and the goodwill and bringing them in, welcoming them in without judging, their skin tone, their religion, their culture, their heritage? Where is that energy when it concerns? It's interesting to see Western these Western powers, or westernized nations, or the West, in other words, say and claim we want freedom for everyone, but as soon as the individuals that look like that, those the very people that they're fighting for freedom for, wanting to claim freedom for, enter their countries, they're made to feel like the other. So it brings me to a moment to also realize there's discrimination, there's racism here in our very countries, and that being Spain, and that being, the USA, and that being the Britain, all these places that always claim to uphold humanity, but historically has proven to not be the case. Continuously do that, right? Or advocate for communities globally, forgetting that communities that are directly linked to those very people, whether that be the Arab community, whether that be Latin American communities, whether that be the Black community, right? And from other parts of the world, but those very people living in the very lands in which there's this whole proclamation for freedom for them, they don't even treat them as their own, right? So are you fighting for actual freedom? Are you actually fighting for equality, for all people to be treated as you, perhaps, if you're a white person, right? Or are you just fighting for to to gain, you know, or garner attention, and to be perceived as a savior, as the good one, the you know, they're always doing right, they're always, you know, being so kind and welcoming to society. But the very societies in which these very people live in say that, or can speak to that not being the case, or that not being true. So once again, as mentioned, the West likes to be portrayed as being better than thou, right? Not being like the others, but historically that has never been the case, and that has never been true. And that narrative is completely false. And yeah, it's time for the world to wake up to that. It's time for communities of color to wake up to that. I also wanted to add that I just encourage for other communities of color that have seen the disparities there to talk about it, to speak on your experience, and don't feel silenced. And I find that a lot of other minority communities outside of the Black community are always uncertain. You know, they don't want to ruffle any feathers. They don't want to be ultimately perceived bad by the colonizer, by those in power. But you can never achieve justice and achieve true freedom by remaining silent. So there's that. And I want to say, all right, take care, everyone.